Her heart was sorrowful, right? You think about, and you'll see this in the text. So I do that. I said a lot of the what we see about Hannah involves heartache and adversity. She's persecuted by her rival. She's so distressed she can't eat. These are just facts in the text that really make the point. She's hurting. And then I do some, I don't, some folks do their application at the end. I try to do my application all along. Sometimes we think if we're doing everything right, we're not going to have problems, but obviously there's so many examples of that. I use illustrations. I talked about, I was in a storm in Northwest Texas, and it was almost, there was a tornado that touched down just a couple of miles from me, killed 3 storm chasers. And I say, boy, you know, we run away from storms. They're synonymous with fear and sorrow. It's the same way in scripture. And so then I take that back to Hannah. What does she do? Her storm did not break her faith. What did she do? She sought help from others. And this is just things you can observe in the text. Not Peninnah, because Peninnah's her tormentor, but Elkanah, am I not better to you than 10 sons? Eli, after he didn't think she was drunk anymore, and he said, may God give you what you're asking for. Search for possible benefits out of that. She's going to use this as an opportunity. God, if you'll do this, so forth, I'll dedicate him to you. See God's power. I just noticed this. You'll notice in 1 Samuel 1. See, these are just, so I'm taking the observations from the text and I'm working them into the material of the sermon. Now, I've been doing this for 30-something years. You'll grow in that ability as you do it. You'll see Jehovah, Yahweh, because that's, you know, your version should have that in all caps. That's the personal name of God. And that's not my notes, but I made that point as we went through. 23 times, God is all over this story, even though Hannah is struggling with her personal problem. And then in chapter 2, and what's the Old Testament Magnificat, it's a lot like Mary's prayer in Luke 1. She credits God for helping her, taking action. Shelter in a place of safety. Where does she turn? She goes to the house of the Lord and turns to the servant of the Lord. That's what we need to do. Instead of isolating ourselves and going away from the people of God, we need to turn to God, to the house of God, the church, and the people of God, those that make up the church. So anyway, then I noticed her heart was prayerful. I analyzed the prayer. So see, I'm doing a lot of, what I'm showing you is a lot of the early part of the process, and then how I put it into the sermon. When you analyze her prayer in chapter 1, I noticed 4 things about it. Now this what I'm showing you is the product of probably 2, 3, 4 hours of sermon study and preparation to get to this final point. But that's just part of what we're doing when we're writing a sermon. Her prayer was emotional, true. Yeah, you can look and see that. How does God see our prayers? It was transactional. By that, she made a vow. If you'll do this, then I will do this. How do we show God that we mean business? Maybe by fasting, maybe by saying, God, I vow to you that I'm going to do this. It was continual. I noticed, here's where a word study comes into play. That word continual in verse 12 of the New American Standard is from the Hebrew word meaning multiply. And I noted how that word's used in that phrase in Genesis a lot. Be fruitful and multiply, become great. You know, then that made my mind think of the widow and the unjust judge. And so I made that point, right? And then her prayer was truthful. What happens after God grants what she asked for? She does it. Her prayer has integrity. I go to Solomon's words, you know, if you make a vow, be quick to fulfill it. But then I try to do a little bit more application. What does she teach us when we're standing knocking on the doors of life? I look at Jesus's words in Matthew 7, but it also must be according to his will. I found an illustration about Einstein. Illustrations are great to drive points home. People's light bulbs are going off. And, you know, and my point from that is, I'll send the sermon if you want the sermon, and you can kind of look at it more in detail so that I don't preach the whole thing to you. I didn't mean to do that. But through this whole process, this is how I do all my sermons. I write it all out. I'm taking information, I'm sharing it, and I'm making applications. So how can people use this in their lives? The bottom line, my punchline was, Hannah shows us that doors which are closed today may be open tomorrow. That's what happened with her. Or maybe God will show us a better door. So really that was the takeaway for folks was you're struggling with something. You want to look at it from a spiritual perspective. Know that God's at work and he's going to do what's best. Doesn't mean if you can't have children, you're going to automatically have children, but it means that you're going to see God at work before it's all over. Okay, so what I've shown you, Jet, is how I use it. I do a full content outline, and and I have an attention getter. So you guys had all that probably in sermon prep and delivery. Was, you know, a good hook. Introduction needs to be relatively brief. Your conclusion needs to be relatively brief. Probably 5% of the lesson. You know the whole thing. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Some of those little principles that come into play. But you're using illustrations, you're making observations, and then you're making applications. And then the process to get it from there to preach. I preach without notes when I'm preaching, is just to go over that, practice it out loud. Then you learn, hey, maybe I can say this a little bit better. But then you get up there and you just preach what you can remember. And when I taught homiletics, I said the last stage is the frozen method. Let it go. Right? And what's her name? Elsa. Let it go. Remember what you can, and realize that nobody else can see your outline. So if you forgot something, only you know and God knows, and it's not going to really materially hurt the effectiveness of the lesson. All right, that was probably too long of an explanation, but does that help give any kind of insight into how, that's at least how I approach it, how I go about it? The illustrations don't necessarily come at first. You have to go and dig and find that. And there's finding illustrations is just one whole part of how you do that anyway. But I have to tell you this, I found this really cool illustration about a woman in India. So the thought came to my mind, Hannah couldn't have her womb was closed year after year. And I found this, I typed in Google, oldest woman to have a baby. And so I came up with this lady. She was 74 years old when she had twin girls. And, you know, and I'm thinking, I got 74-year-old women out in the audience and people who are in their 50s, 60s going, I can't imagine. But talking about, that's not so incredible to us, because we know when a woman entered motherhood in her 90s, but saying, you know, this was a trial for her. And so anyway, it's a good attention getter. Everybody's with me. They're seeing that Wes Blankenship does my PowerPoints. And so we found this picture of this Mangayama, what is it? Uramedi, and her twin girls sitting next to her, and she's an old woman. It's pretty cool. Anyway, thoughts? Do you want to see me send that to you so you can kind of see?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Okay. If you don't mind.
I don't mind.
And if you have any other resources, like, I don't know if there's just guides that help you learn how to navigate the text to study it better. I think that's sometimes where I struggle, is how do I study and how do I,
I do. Because